In this video I'm going to show you how to attach an interfaced waistband and to apply a hook and bar to the top. For this sample you'll need to cut out one of these waistband pieces. So if you have this pattern, cut along the bold lines, the outer bold lines, cut one in fabric and cut one in interfacing, and you'll also need to cut two of these garment pieces to attach to the waistband. So I've cut my waistband piece here, and I've also applied the interfacing to the wrong side, and I've cut out two of these garment pieces as well, so I've got two of those ready. My next stage is to insert a lapped zip into the garment pieces before I'm then going to apply the waistband. So I'm not going to show you in this video how to apply the lap zip, so you'll just need to refer to my other video on how to insert a lap zip, and you'll see that the lap zip's in the same fabric as this. I've inserted the lap zip and I'm now ready to apply my waistband. You'll have a long waistband piece like this, but to attach it to your lap zip sample you'll need to cut it in half. So I'm just going to fold that in half, like so, and then cut in the middle. Then I'll open up the zip, and the waistband will be applied right sides together, so that where you've got the excess fabric, that's where the zip is here. So have it so it's flush to this edge with all the excess fabric where the zip end is. And if this was a garment, then you'd want to have some excess fabric around the zip section as well. Your pattern will allow for a certain amount of overlap. So those edges are pinned like so, and then I'm going to stitch the waistband to the top edge here using a 1.5 cm seam allowance. And when I stitch across this section here, I don't need to go all the way to the end, but I do need to make sure that I've stitched as far as the end of this piece here. So I'll be stitching across the zip and up to the folded edge of this front part. So I'm going to keep the edge of the fabric here in line with this 15 line, or 1.5 cm line, and just stitch from that edge. Once you've stitched so that you know you've covered the zip section, then you can just reverse and finish off there. You don't need to go all the way to the end. So you'll see on there that I've gone far enough to cover the zip and come to the end there. You do want to make sure when you're stitching here that you're not aiming to stitch over the zip stop here at the top of the zip, because you will break the needle if you try and sew through that. Then I'll just repeat with the other side. And I'm going to start from just below this section here. So again, making sure that that's secured up to that point there. The waistband's been attached on both sides of the front section, and the next thing to do is to do a bit of ironing. First of all, I'm going to just iron. You can finger press this actually, or you can iron it, but I like to make a crease down the centre of the waistband so I know that that is the centre fold line of the waistband. So I've just folded that raw edges so the raw edges meet. Just finger press a crease across the centre of the waistband on both sides. And then I'm going to open this out and press my seam allowance towards the waistband. I want to make sure that if you do iron over the zip, that you don't melt the zip, because I've seen that happen quite a few times where people iron the zips and melt the zip teeth to the iron, so do be careful with that. So I've pressed the seam allowance towards the waistband here, and I'm also going to turn the other edge under by 1.5 centimetres, so you can measure that to make sure that you are being accurate there. So I can check that that is 1.5 centimetres at both ends. And I'm turning this under now because that will make things a bit easier when I come to my last step. So that's that side done, and I'll just do the same with the other side. So pressing the seam allowance towards the waistband, taking care not to melt the zip. And then turning this over by 1.5 centimetres, checking that is correct. And ironing that in place. Now if you've got quite thick fabric here, what you could do at this stage is to layer the seam allowance on your waistband. So I could trim away some of the seam allowance here, and I could layer it by cutting both amounts off by a small amount here. I'm going to keep the section around where the zip is just for the moment, and then the inner section I can trim off a little bit more, so this bit in the middle here is cut shorter. So that's what I mean by layering, is to trim the different layers of the fabric by staggered amounts. Okay, and I could do the same the other side, just to reduce some of the bulk there, especially if you've got thicker fabrics on your sample. So I'm cut both edges, trim them both by a certain amount, say about 5mm, and then just trim off a bit more from the waistband, and then the longer section will cover over the shorter section so you don't see it from this side. Okay, now what I want to do next is to create an underlap on this section here, and this edge I want to sit flush. So when the waistband is complete, what will happen is you'll have this section which kind of sticks out underneath, so underlapping, and this section will be turned over and will sit flush like that to join up to the other side. And to decide which edge should be the underlap and which edge should sit flush makes much more sense when you've got a lap zip, because you can see that this edge where you've got the lap created, that's the bit you want to have on top, sitting flush to that edge, and then the bit where you see the zip is a section where you want to create an underlap. Now on some waist finishes you may have an overlap, so this section could stick out over the edge here with a fastening here, maybe a button or something. So it just depends on what it is you're making, but just be aware that you need to think carefully about how you're finishing off the ends at this point. So I'll first of all explain how to create this side here, which will sit flush with this front edge. So to do the side which will sit flush, I'm going to fold my waistband piece right sides together like that, folding it so that the edges that are turned under by 1.5 centimetres on either side stay turned under, and that should be folded exactly along that centre line that I creased earlier. So folding it right sides together, and then I shall put a pin in there, and what I'll do is to stitch exactly flush with this edge, following that as a line and stitching straight across here. So I'm just going to pin it like that for the moment. Where I've folded my waistband right sides together here, I'm going to stitch from the other side. So I'm going to just flip that over and stitch from here, and I'm going to use this edge as a bit of a guide to get me started. I'll just take that pin out from underneath. So make sure that those folded edges do meet up, and then I can use this edge here as a guide because I want to just be stitching just to the right of this fold here, stitching along there and then completing that line of stitching to the top. So that's stitched straight across there. I'm going to just trim my edges, trim the threads. Then you'll find you've got quite a lot of excess fabric here, and I can just cut that away. So give yourself about 0.5 centimetre or so and just cut that off, and then you can also trim a little bit away from that corner and a little bit away from the corner at the top. And then you'll find that this will turn to the right side, and you can just take some scissors or a point maker, just poke the end out there so you've got a nice sharp corner on that side. So that's one side done. So I now need to create the underlap on the second side, and to do that I'm going to just open back out where I'd pressed earlier. So I'm going to open out that folded up edge, and I'm going to open out the other folded edge, and I'm going to put these together right sides facing, and I'm going to then turn that to the other side so you can see where I've stitched in the previous stage. So with those edges right sides together, I'm then going to continue this line of stitching here, and I'm going to stitch just a touch further and then pivot and stitch to the end. So I'm stitching in like a backwards L shape along there. So I'm just going to put in a couple of pins to hold that in position, and then I'll take that over to the machine. So I'm going to carry on from using this line here as a guide. I want to start stitching from where the end of the zip, and I can feel the end of the zip there from where that is, and start there. So using the same line of stitches as a guide and stitching exactly over them. I don't need to stitch all the way to the end before I pivot because I've got a little bit too much fabric here, but I don't want to come about 2 centimetres this way and then pivot. So just take that pin out and back tack at the beginning, following that line. That's probably about far enough. Lift up the foot at that stage, pivot, and then lower the foot back down, and then just stitch up straight up that edge, and edge finish. So you can see I've just done an L shape there, so following that line of stitching along and then up. Now I've stitched on this side, I can trim away some of the excess fabric here, so like before, just cutting away, so I've got about 0.5 centimetre. I can cut quite close to the stitching there, so I'll come a bit closer actually, taking the corner off there, and then I can just trim quite close there and just take that bit away. And then now that that's all reduced in bulk, I can turn that to the right side and try and get myself some nice sharp corners on that underlap section. This is quite a narrow waistband that I'm working with, so you might find if you're making a garment that you've actually got a bit more room than this to play with. I'm just going to use a pen to initially poke that end out. I'll probably get this ruler in there. So if you're finding you can't get your corner out, what you can do is to just use a pin and just try and find the threads that are in the corner to pull on those and help that to come out like so. And I can do the same with the other corner. So then I've got a much sharper corners there. Just take care not to pull too much and start to pull the threads of the fabric so that that begins to fray at that end. Okay, so now I've got my underlap section here, and that edge will cover nicely there so that when that's done up, those two edges will come together and meet. So all I need to do next is just to finish off the inside of the waistband. I've already pressed this, but I can give it another press. I'm just going to open the zip, get that out of the way, so I can press that again in position. And you see this is where that turning that end, the raw edge under earlier, is quite handy. You can press that so I've got a nice crisp edge there. And then I can press this end over here, and I'm going to use a hand slip stitch to finish that section across there. So I need to get a needle and thread. So I've got my needle and thread, just tie a knot in one end, and then I can use a slip stitch on each side. So if I just start by burying the knot inside here, then I can go through the folded edge of the waistband here, and then into the zip, then back into the folded edge of the waistband, along a little bit, and back into the zip there, back into the fold. So where I'm coming out of the zip, I go back into the fold directly opposite, stitch along a little way, and then I can use the threads here from my stitch line and pick up those stitches. So I just pick up that stitch there, back into the fold, stitch along the fold a little way, and then pull those stitches, and you see that starts to become a nice clean invisible finish. So just 3 thread. So where I've come out of the fold here, just pick up that stitch directly opposite, then go back into the fold in the same place or thereabouts, stitch along for about a centimetre, pick up a stitch, back into the fold, and I'm going to do that all the way along, and then I'll do the same on the other side. I finished the hand stitching, so that's nice and neat and even along there. If you wanted to, you could then add top stitching or edge stitching around your waistband at this point. And then to finish this off, Just make sure that that does meet nice and evenly across. The waistband should be a regular width on both sides, and then I'm going to attach a hook and bar to keep this fixed in position at the top. So the bar will be attached on the side that's got the underlap, so that will be fixed about there, and then the hook will go onto this side and be attached quite close to that edge there, so when they come together they will be fastened at that point. So to get these in the right place, it's best to position the hook first exactly where you want that to be, and then position the bar so it closes in the right place. So I'm going to do that by just putting some marks with this disappearing pen, so I can just put a marker through the holes to mark that where that needs to be stitched, and then I'm going to hand sew that in place. So I've got my needle and thread, and I'm going to just tie a knot in one end, and I've got a double thread, so I've threaded it through the needle. I've got my 2 strands of thread, and I'm going to tie a knot in that end, and I'm doing it double because then it's a bit quicker to sew that on. So I'll start first with the hook, and I've put a marker there, but what you want to aim for is so that you've got about 3mm or so here of fabric showing. If you position the hook too far over, then you see the hook when the garment's closed, so I want that positioned about 3mm in, and it's central here. If you've got a wider waistband, then you want to maybe aim nearer to the top, or you might even want 2 hooks and 2 bars, so you've got a better fastening. But as this is quite a narrow one, I can aim for the middle. So I'm going to start first with this one here. So I'm just going to bring my thread through so the knot stays on the underside. And I want to be very careful when I sew this on that I don't want loads and loads of stitching coming through to the right side. So I'm going to try and keep my stitching just through a single layer of fabric. You may find that you want to make 1 stitch through to the right side and back again, just a small stitch, just to secure that and to keep the 2 layers together. And then I'm going to try and just stitch through a single layer of fabric, and I'm just going over and then back through the hole. So through the fabric there and then back through the hole, and you'll see on the right side I'm not really coming through at all. So once you feel that that's secure enough, so I've done about 4 stitches on that side, then I'm going to take my thread back through and into the fabric, and I'm going to try and go through just 1 layer so it's not coming through to the right side, and then come out down here where I can sew that second hole on. So trying to keep that hook straight there. So again, just coming through a single layer of fabric and just stitching over and back through the hole, over the edge and back through the hole. It's much easier to go that way round than to try and go through the hole and under that way. So over the edge and through. And again at this point I'm going to just take 1 small stitch through, right the way through to the right side. I'm just going to take a tiny stitch there and come back just to secure that. So it's just a very tiny stitch just to secure that. And when you feel you've gone over enough times over and through the hook, then you can take your thread down to the end hole, so coming out just beyond the end hole, and then I can go back through the fabric, through the hole, and just fix a few stitches in place there. And then to fasten off, I'll just stitch through those threads, and then again, and then I'm going to just bring my thread through the fabric and out over there and cut that off. So that's the hook in place, and I'm going to try and get that knot so it sits underneath the hook there. And now I need to get my bar to be exactly in the right position. So to position the bar correctly, I want to make sure that it's in line with the zip, that it sits almost to the top edge of the fabric, and that then when the hook's done up on there, it will sit so that the zip's covered and the hook isn't seen and the bar isn't seen. So it is very much in line exactly with the zip and just slightly to one side of where the teeth are there. So I'm going to use my pen to just mark into the holes of the bar, because this has a tendency to move around and slide. So I'm going to fix that there with a needle and thread. Okay, and I'm going to leave the knot on the underside. So bring the knot up through where I want that to be attached, and then come through one of the holes of the bar, and then hold that in position exactly where I want it to be. And then I'm just going to over sew a few times through the fabric, through the hole. When I feel that that's on and fixed, I'm then going to take the needle into the fabric and then just come through one layer and come out, so that's not gone through and leaving a big stitch on the underside there. Come out where I need to here at the bottom of the bar and try and make sure that that sits straight, and then I can sew the bottom of that bar in place by just going over sewing a few times like before. And then once that's done, I'm going to just take a stitch there and come back through the thread, so I'm tying a knot, and then take my needle into the fabric, through the fabric a little way, and cut that off there. So that's the hook and bar attached. So when they're fixed there, everything is covered up. So that's that done. So that's my sample of the lap zip with the hook and bar and my interfaced waistband. And I've edge finished with the pinking shears just to finish off. So there we go.